1 minute. Just give them a minute and I'll make sure you get set up. Okay, you should be good. Okay. Yes. Remind you before 15. You'll give it 5 minutes down? Okay.
The time has started. Should I restart it?
That time doesn't.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, a very good evening to everyone present here. My name is Aparna Moitra, and I'll be presenting our paper on evolving low-cost community mobilization strategies for a voice-based community media platform in rural India. This paper has previously been published in ICTDX. So, to begin with, I'd like to briefly discuss the concept of community media and its theory of change. Community media platforms such as community radio and community video enable communities to create and share their own media based on their specific needs and context, which is believed to lead to community empowerment along 4 broad pathways. First, participatory content production gives the community media platforms a contextual character that enables people to understand the messages more easily and act on them. Marginalized communities, groups along caste, class, and gender lines find representation on these platforms. These groups become more empowered to raise their voices against local power structures. Third, community media platforms promote good governance and accountability by facilitating multi-stakeholder dialogues. And finally, these platforms help build cohesive communities by providing community members with a forum in which to articulate their shared cultural identities and discuss topics of mutual interest. So just to give a little background, our platform Mobilization currently works using interactive voice response systems. It has been devised based on the needs of economically poor and low literacy populations. So here's how it works. Users give a missed call on a callback number to record their experiences and share information. Their submitted responses and experiences are then validated and moderated by Mobilization employees as per its editorial policies and published over the internet and the IVR. Other people then call into the callback number to listen to the validated information. So essentially it works similar to the platform CGNet Swara and Awaaz Otlo platforms that have been presented at ICTD in the past. Currently, Mobilization receives 1.5 to 2 million calls each year from many active districts in the states of Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Bihar. So while the pathways of bringing about developmental impact through various communication technologies and community media have been demonstrated by many initiatives in the past, research into the processes of driving adoption of these platforms among rural and low literate populations have received much less attention. So therefore, in our presentation today, we are going to elaborate about the community mobilization processes of Mobilization. So community mobilization essentially refers to the offline processes of training and guiding users towards the adoption of a platform. These processes entail building users' skills on how to use the technology, as well as recording quality content on the platform, which entails training on what to speak and how to speak. So in Mobilezation's case, it is needed because Mobilization users are predominantly from rural and low literate populations living in mass media dark regions. They don't have easy access to television, newspapers, etc. So these media platforms cannot be used to popularize Mobilization. Moreover, users reside in difficult to reach remote regions where a direct interpersonal community awareness approach was found to be the only alternative to inform people about Mobilization. These users are also first-time users of any automated service, so therefore they need to be demonstrated how to use the technology. And all regions are different, so the users have to be trained to conceptualize their own use cases for the empowerment of the community. For the study, we used a qualitative approach. Data were collected from 2011 until 2016 from using participant observations by 2 of the authors who are also members of Gramvani team. In-depth interviews with 5 other members of the organizations were also done, and significant change stories were collected from 98 Mobilization users using the most significant change technique. We longitudinally divided Mobilezation's community mobilization strategies into 4 phases on the basis of their organic evolution. So the y-axis represents Gramvani's organizational control over the Mobilizer user network, and the x-axis represents the number of users participating on Mobilivani. I'll now give a brief overview of Mobilivani's 4 phases of mobilization. So in the first phase, we began seeding the Mobilivani platform by partnering with local rights-based NGOs. We found that in this phase, Gramvani had relatively low control over the platform, over the Mobilizer user network, because the NGO functionaries appropriated the platform for their own purposes and further discouraged diverse usage of the platform. There was also very little word-of-mouth publicity, and hence the reach of the platform was also limited. In the second phase, due to increasing word-of-mouth publicity and the use of Mobilivani by a few power users to harness the potential of the platform for activism, the Mobilivani network went viral and rapidly grew in popularity, mobilizing a much higher number of users than the first phase. At the same time, we found that Gramvani's control on the platform was getting lowered in terms of being unable to predict what the platform was getting used for. So in the third phase, Gramvani went on to directly recruit volunteers who would mobilize users in their local community. The volunteer structure, along with monetary incentives, improved organizational control as well as user outreach. However, due to the issues of management, the flat volunteer structure, in the fourth phase, the volunteer engagement process was further structured into smaller groups of local area clubs. This resolved the management issues and helped improve the organizational control on the Mobilizer user network, and at the same time increase the number of users participating on the platform. So Mobilivani's combined strategy for the first 2 phases was not to exercise any control and leave the platform open for users to create it according to their own needs. As discussed, in the first phase, we partnered with local rights-based NGOs to popularize Mobilivani in their communities. These NGO functionaries were strong local activists who, understanding its relative ease in doing their work of collecting grievances from communities, appropriated the platform as a grievance reporting and redressal forum. So the users began using it as such. Since these local functionaries did not have enough bandwidth to resolve all the grievances, the users became dissatisfied with the service and eventually stopped calling. Another aspect which is worth noting is that the NGO functionaries were controlling what the platform is getting used for. For instance, they did not encourage users' participation for purposes such as cultural expression, because essentially they were not interested in building user skills to use the platform for other purposes. For the second phase, Mobilivani conducted workshops with a few regular users who were not affiliated to any NGOs. These users were then expected to train other community members on using the platform by word-of-mouth publicity. However, halfway into this phase, some power users appropriated the platform for activism to initiate a protest or a strike, and the network went viral. One of the more popular instances is about statewide contractual teachers who were protesting to convert their contractual appointments into permanent ones and spread the Mobilivani number into the entire network to advocate about their issues on the platform. However, as the protests faded out, we observed that the users lacked clarity on using the platform, and there was a greater unpredictability on the outcomes of virality, and hence this strategy was not fit for scale. So the broader idea behind Gramvani's approach of not strategically pushing the direction of the platform stemmed from their desire to promote a democratic and a contextually appropriate uptake of the usage of the platform. However, as we observed in the first 2 phases, not only was it counterproductive to the intended objective, it also prevented skilling of users for more democratic use of the platform. This enabled appropriation of the platform by a few powerful users, thereby restricting its potential. And we would like to note here that while technology only amplifies human intent, in this case it ended up amplifying the intent of the powerful. Consolidating the outcomes of lack of organizational control in the first 2 phases, Gramvani strived to have a certain degree of control over Mobilivani's community mobilizers and user networks in the third phase. For this, Gramvani employed 3 community managers to mobilize their own communities and to monitor and prevent its undesirable appropriation by power users. These community managers in turn recruited new volunteers who and trained them as per the organizational SOPs of appropriating Mobilivani as a community media platform. monetary incentives were initiated for the first time in this phase, where each volunteer was individually provided with basic out-of-pocket expenses they incurred while mobilizing new users. The three-tier mobilization structure, as shown here, however, had two shortcomings. First, there was no set criteria for users to be recruited as volunteers, and second, there was no upper limit for volunteers to be recruited from a particular region, which led to 3 community managers managing 120 volunteers individually. So analyzing the strategies of the third phase, community managers had too many volunteers to mentor, due to which mentoring each volunteer was very difficult. There emerged a need for a system to monitor the volunteers more carefully, and one way of monitoring the volunteers who were conducting the mobilization activities was by formalizing one-to-one referral policy, as Gramvani did not want to rely on volunteers' self-reporting of these community meetings. This referral policy entailed capturing information on whom the volunteers were referring, that is, who they were speaking with and training to use the platform. It was built in the mobilization activity, as the volunteers just had to refer the phone number of the community members they trained. This helped Gramvani capture data regarding which volunteer mobilized how many users and who these users were. The volunteers were entitled to financial incentives for each user they referred. However, volunteers skipped the training part and blindly started entering numbers into the referral system database. Here's a quote, a volunteer's quote about how some volunteers, in order to earn more money, resorted to unfair methods such as referring random numbers gathered from mobile phone recharge shops, and without actually training the users and demonstrating the system, they just claimed the monetary incentive. So the referral policy was eventually discontinued, as financial incentives were prone to gaming and were also hard to monitor. These aspects put together, the honest and hardworking volunteers were getting paid lesser, reducing their sense of collective spirit and higher purpose for mobilizing communities for the platform. So this large group of volunteers in the fourth phase was then divided into district-wise smaller groups known as Mobile Vani clubs. And these clubs were given their separate channel, and they were linked to the statewide Mobile Vani channel, creating a federated structure, as we can see on the slide. So the three-tier structure from phase 3 transitioned into a 4-tier structure in phase 4, where the community members were only recruited as volunteers if they exhibited sustained interest and effort. And the club volunteers would then elect a club coordinator among them, and the club coordinator was responsible for interfacing with the community manager, appraising them about the club activities and seeking guidance. So the formation of volunteer clubs led to efficient monitoring by community managers, which then led to complementarity of incentives. We found 4 types of incentives operating in this phase. Here we refer to Olson's full vocabulary of selective incentives, where first is monetary incentive, which refers to monetary rewards delivered for facilitating collective action. In this phase, we resorted to calculating volunteers' incentives using the group-based incentives that are given equally to every volunteer and are calculated on the basis of collective group performance in terms of call volume received on the club. The role of group-based incentives is to reinforce collectivism and mutual accountability. We also put in place individual incentives based on individual efforts for the number of good quality content volunteers contributed on the club, as well as the number of community meetings that the volunteers conducted for training the new users. So this was essentially a trust-based self-reported incentive. Rather than putting a referral system in place similar to the previous phase, we let the mobilization activity be self-reported, and found that because of mutual accountability, this self-reported incentive wasn't gamed, and this provision hasn't been misused so far. We also found that these monetary incentives further promoted solidarity incentive, which refers to the spirit of solidarity and spirit of solidarity that the volunteers get from working with each other. It also promoted social incentives such as recognition and social rewards that volunteers get when they engage in community building, which eventually led to purposive incentives, which refers to the moral feeling of self-satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing. So here's a quote from the community manager, which says that, which attested the efficacy of the club model and reinforced essentially how it helped better in organizing the clubs, thereby scaling the club model in other districts. This was also attested and reinforced by one of the volunteers who said that they like working on the issues of their own area as a close collective, as it gives them a sense of purpose. We would also like to share here that as volunteers are meshed within the community, they are also able to think of relevant use cases for technology, such as the Mobile Vani clubs that had more farmers as their users. The volunteers began an agricultural advisory for the clubs which were near town centers, industrial town centers. The volunteers provision for information about local employment opportunities, and as we can see from the quote, health advisory as well. So we have two key takeaways from our presentation. The first is that undesirable appropriation of technology happens but can be prevented by an emphasis on skill building. Our focus on community mobilization helped improve the skills of the users who weren't able to participate on the platform, enabling them to shape the platform use in contextually relevant ways for their communities. Second, collective spirit and organizational control can both be achieved through a federated model of smaller decentralized groups, where federated structure helps impose a certain degree of organizational control, as managing smaller groups is much easier than managing one large group. The decentralized small group structure of the clubs gave freedom to the volunteers to pursue their objectives, which are particularly relevant to their communities. Moreover, the design of the incentives was such that different incentives were intertwined to be able to build stable structures. And finally, the structures help the volunteers build a sense of collective responsibility and prevent undesirable appropriation due to mutual accountability. In terms of future work, we are now thinking of how we can model a framework to compare Mobile Vani with other participatory media platforms such as Facebook and WhatsApp to understand if these principles can be applied universally. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? I realize it's hard at the end of the day, but if you have any questions, otherwise, thank you for the talk. So we're going to have a virtual presentation by Minh Jeonghan from University of Washington. The title of the paper is Facebook's Free Basics and Implications for Development, IT Identity and Social Capital.
Yeah, so this is going to be a remote presentation. So we'll have the presentation video first, and then she's online, and we'll have a kind of remote question and answer session after. One moment.
Audio is out. No, it's not out. It's right here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and this one. How do we raise the volume? Just volume is on? I think it's on. That doesn't work. Yeah, I think it's on. Yeah. Okay, good to go.
And thank you for staying until the very last presentation of the conference. My name is Minh Jeonghan, and I'm a PhD student at the University. Good afternoon, and thank you for. I'm here to present the paper titled Facebook's Free Basics and Implications for Development. Good afternoon, and thank you for staying until the very last presentation. I worked with Dr. Ricardo Gomez of UW iSchool and Dr. Michelle Carter of Washington State University Carson College of Business. Before I begin the presentation, I'd like to clarify that the authors neither advocate or argue against free basics, and this is not at the core of the paper. What we'd like to highlight is how us as researchers can examine individual and communal development implications of ICTD projects and where the room lies for researchers to work with development partners and participants. To give you a very brief background, Free Basics is a mobile application that was introduced by Facebook under the Internet.org initiative. The service is provided through Good afternoon, and thank you for staying until the very last presentation of the conference. My name is Social Networking Service, and other contents on news, employment, health, education, and local information are accessible through the app without data charges. It is argued that the aim of the platform is to provide more affordable access to useful internet services. As of January 2019, the service is available in 65 countries and municipalities in Europe, Africa and Middle East, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. Some might have a bit of difficulty seeing how Free Basics can be discussed in parallel with ICTD. We found some common ground. First, at least on the surface, there are some common objectives of Free Basics and ICTD. They are supposedly aimed to promote access to and exchange of information, enabling users to create and enhance social networks, and use information and technology in meaningful ways for themselves. Second, looking at the history of ICTD and Free Basics operation, there have been consequences or debates that may or may not match with their supposedly original intentions of enriching people's lives. In fact, Free Basics has been controversial in countries including India, where the operation of the zero-rated internet service was banned in 2016 after a long debate, as it was perceived as violating net neutrality. Our research question in this setting is, what is the nature of Free Basics' potential implications on individual and community development? We addressed the research question through the analysis of one of the forefront services offered through Free Basics, i.e. Facebook, the social networking service, and then extend the Free Basics discussion to the broader context of ICTD. In defining development, this study aligns with Amartya Sen's notion of capability approach, where development is defined as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy to pursue the kind of lives that they value and have reason to value. From this viewpoint, we believe the notion of development can be equated with empowerment at the individual level and social capital formation at the communal level. The paper's analytical framework or research process is as follows. We use 3 different meanings or degrees of self in information technology identity formation process, 3 different forms of social capital, and 8 different categories of Facebook use as building blocks of analytical framework, which will be explained later on. With these building blocks, we mapped different categories of Facebook use against the 2 dimensions of degrees of self and forms of social capital. We then examined Free Basics and its potential implications on individual and community development. The first building block of our analytical framework is degrees of self that comes from information technology identity theory. The theory was first introduced by Carter and Grover. IT identity is defined as the status where a person perceives IT as integral to one's sense of self. A person with strong IT identity experiences losses of capabilities if detached from the technology. In relation to mobile phones, Carter et al. In 2012 found 3 different types of meanings that undergraduate students develop as mobile phone users become increasingly embedded across various aspects of their lives, which are functional, relational, and self-identification meanings. From left to right, they illustrate the increasing degree to which an individual regards a certain technology as part of oneself. With the example of mobile phones, I'll explain each meaning that one can attach to the use of IT. For the functional meaning, those who primarily use mobile as a means to communicate with others tend to focus on functional attributes, such as device features. The use of mobile takes on new meaning, i.e. relational meaning, as one rely on device for maintaining and enhancing social relationships. Here, one becomes attentive to what one means to others in their social circle through the use of mobiles. Lastly, as one utilizes many different features of mobile and applies them in a wide range of situations and relationships, one may describe the device as being part of oneself and of being lost or not real without it. Here, the person can be described to have formed IT identity. Our second building block was 3 different forms of social capital. We referred to Putnam, Williams, and Ellison et al. And looked at bridging, bonding, and maintaining social capital. Bridging social capital is a type of social capital that indicates outward-looking, weak ties formed with individuals from diverse backgrounds, such as people with the same occupation. In comparison, bonding social capital can be described as inward-looking, exclusive strong ties, such as close friends or family. Maintaining social capital indicates the ability to maintain social ties through online network as one progresses through life changes. Our last element of analytical framework is different categories of Facebook use. This was constructed based on 2 previous studies which listed different types of Facebook or social networking service use. We combined and integrated the 2 lists and identified 8 different types of Facebook use, which are surveillance-oriented, related to simply viewing newsfeed or others' Facebook wall; consumption-oriented, related to intake of useful information; event-oriented, related to organizing events; media uploading-oriented, indicating uploading pictures, music, or videos; contact-oriented, related to communicating with other people; group-oriented, related to gathering and communicating with like-minded people; discussion-oriented, related to producing writings based on one's opinion; and status-updated-oriented, related to making announcements about one's status through changing profile page and affiliation information. To examine Facebook or Free Basics implications on development, we've mapped the 8 categories of Facebook use against the dimensions of 3 degrees of self and 3 forms of social capital. For example, if someone uses Facebook to consume useful information without actively communicating with other users, the use would be categorized under consumption-oriented use, demonstrating relatively high functional meanings of information technology and relatively low bridging social capital. Those who use Facebook to update and announce one's personal information would be classified under status-updated oriented use, which is related to self-identification meaning of IT, encompassing bridging, bonding, and maintaining social capital. So for instance, a person who focuses on functional attributes of Facebook, i.e. having functional meanings, would be mostly engaged in activities that are surveillance-oriented, consumption-oriented, event-oriented, contact-oriented, or media uploading-oriented, more so than discussion-oriented or status update-oriented activities. This in turn would mean that the individual would be participating in social connections related to bridging social capital more so than the related to bonding and maintained social capital from the Facebook use. Based on the above analysis, we can derive implications for Facebook's Free Basics and ICTD projects in general. First, at the individual level, the type of meanings, i.e. functional, relational, or self-identification, that one attached to Facebook may influence the types of Facebook use and may in turn influence the range of social networks that one would engage through Facebook. Implications on ICTD in general is that one should take into consideration the level of identity formation by target participants. At the communal level, attention is needed to how Facebook use exhibited at the individual level leads to social capital creation and thus community development. Implication on ICTD in general is that connection between individual empowerment and social capital creation should be considered. Moreover, the analysis implies that it is neither Facebook nor Free Basics, i.e. technology per se, which determines the development impact through the technology use, i.e. we're against techno-deterministic arguments. Instead, the analysis implies that it is individual or society who determines the development impact through the technology use. Now we will briefly look into other concerns surrounding Free Basics. The concerns highlighted in italic actually comes from the statement released by around 50 faculty members of the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science in 2015 on the key problems of Free Basics. The concerns have broader implications which can be applied to ICTD in general. First, it was argued that Facebook assumes control of defining what a basic service is, and this is related to the discussion surrounding net neutrality. Implications on ICTD projects in general is that Because of ICT projects, there can be restrictions on participants' freedom to make their own decisions about information access and usage. It was also argued that if something comes for free, its cost has to appear from somewhere else. Telecom operators will have to recover the cost of free basics app from the non-free services. Implications on ICT projects in general is that there can be societal costs in monetary terms or structural terms as a result of ICT projects. As discussion and conclusion, we saw that areas of concern exist for free basics, or more narrowly Facebook, as a tool for development, including potential restrictions on participants' choices, potential societal costs, etc. Our analysis shows that individual degrees of self in terms of IT identity formation may influence how Facebook use or free basics use leads to individual empowerment and social capital creation. We argue that researchers can work towards increasing transparency among stakeholders by examining and informing both potential benefits and harms of ICT initiatives for the participants to make more informed decisions. This is the end of our presentation of the paper, and thank you very much for listening to the presentation.
Thank you for being here. I think the email was, you just put up the email for a second. If you have any questions, please feel free to email her. We should thank her for, I think she's watching it, so maybe we should acknowledge her. We like her talk. Now we have Dipanjan Chakraborty. He's going to be talking about experiences from a mobile-based behavior change campaign on maternal and child nutrition in rural India.
Which was yours? Slides. Then we actually need it to be mirrored, sorry. Which is the full screen one? View and then full screen. There we go.
Okay, very good afternoon. This is the last session. I hope everyone is awake now. I'm Dipanjan. I'm a researcher at Gramvani, and my co-author for this paper, Adit Eshwar, is in the audience. I'll be discussing the experiences from a mobile-based behavior change campaign on maternal and child nutrition in rural India, and this is a joint effort by the entire Gramvani team. And we, at the outset, want to acknowledge the support of our partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Project Concern International, and Jivika. It is well known that Bihar lags behind the Indian national average in several health indicators. For example, the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate, the under 5 mortality rate. And similarly, India has persistent problems for the various nutrition indicators. There are several children born with low birth weight, stuntedness, wastedness, anemia, and vitamin A deficiency. One of the several causes for this problem is the level of awareness and the behavior at the household and individual levels. And several organizations have been trying to counter this with something called Social and Behavior Change Communication, or SBCC, which are communication strategies to promote positive health outcomes, health behavior outcomes at the individual and household levels. And this involves careful planning, segmentation of the users, designing of materials, and disseminating of the communication material over TV and mass media like TV and print, and also through interpersonal channels like focus group discussions. However, we also know that TV and radio penetration is low. So in this work we explore if participatory media can be leveraged to reinforce SBCC messages. I'd like to thank Aparna for her previous talk. We will be working with Mobile Vani, that was extensively discussed by Aparna. Mobile phone usage for participatory media, it has a potential to scale because the mobile phone penetration is increasing yearly and daily. And mobile phone usage, disseminating this communication over mobile phones facilitates on-demand and intra-household content consumption. And it is independent of the internet or text literacy and runs over simple voice calls. However, there are challenges to delivering SBCC over mobile phones. And one of them is, does the target group even have access to mobile phones? And the second is, does the target group have the capability to use technology? In this work, we call the target group primarily women with children, pregnant women, but also we want to promote intra-household and community level discussions around nutrition, so our target group also includes men and other family members. Primarily we target maternal and child health and nutrition behavior, and the core themes of the content on our platform are maternal dietary diversity, complementary feeding, social entitlements, and diarrhea management. And the channel for delivery is, of course, Mobile Vani. With the partner Jivika, we have set up Jivika Mobile Vani. The Jivika SHG network at the basic village level comprises self-help groups. In each self-help group, there is around 10 to 12 households, and which is in a common locality, and this potentially has a potential to reach 100% households in rural Bihar. Each SHG is mentored by Jivika staff called community mobilizers, and each community mobilizers looks after around 100 households, like around 10 SHGs. And the primary task of the community mobilizers is to help the SHGs in financial transactions, financial bookkeepings. But the community mobilizers are also leveraged in other outreach programs. For example, our technical partner PCI is conducting an offline SBCC on health and nutrition, in which they train the community mobilizers on different health and nutrition behavior. And when the community mobilizers meet the SHGs around once a week, community mobilizers train the SHG members around the health and nutrition behavior. What we have done is we have placed a layer of Mobile Vani on top of this offline SBCC, where the Gram Vani field officers train the community mobilizers on the various health and nutrition behaviors, and the community mobilizers in their SHG meetings train the Gram Vani field officers train the community mobilizers on Mobile Vani usage, and the community mobilizers in the SHG meetings train the SHG members on Mobile Vani usage. This is implemented currently in 6 blocks in the Nalanda district in Bihar. The IVR-based community media Mobile Vani is potentially more powerful than mainstream media in this context, because the users themselves have an active role in disseminating and generating the content, and we call this content the user-generated content, or UGCs. The content is designed in partnership with our technical and field partners around the themes of maternal and child nutrition, and the formats for the content is around drama, infotainment, and information capsules. We report a 1-year implementation divided into 4 quarters, during which we handled around 700,000 calls from the users from around 32,000 unique users. However, the complexities arise in several fronts when conducting SBCC over mobile phones, and that are the primary takeaways from our work. And the complexities that I discuss in this talk are around technology adoption, the necessity to diversify the content on the platform, the methods we followed to conduct concurrent monitoring on the platform, and the mobilization pathways that we used and experimented with in conducting this exercise. The first angle that I talk about is the technology adoption process. Primary problem in this geography and in this context is the female phone ownership is very low. In a formative research, we found around 50% of the respondents, the women, have a shared phone usage in their homes. And again, around 80% of the respondents, or the women, were not able to dial a number on their phones. They're only able to receive calls. And in order to fully utilize the features on our platform, we would want the users to be able to place missed calls on our server and also press buttons to navigate the various features on the platform. The third problem is that the SHG members who attend the SHG meetings, who the community mobilizers are training, are usually of an older age and are not very open to adopting new technology platforms. In our experience, we found that with time, persuasion, nurturing, we can develop a culture of phone usage among the users. And that sustained training is important. So one of the nurturing factors that we took forward was a culture to bring their mobile phones, the shared mobile phones, to the community meetings, to the SHG meetings. And we saw that in the first quarter, a median of 40% of the SHG members brought the phones to the meetings, but with training, persuasion, at the end of the fourth quarter, a median of 67% of the members brought the phones to the meetings. As another evidence, this is a CDF of the number of user-generated contributions which were rejected by the moderation process in several quarters. So the x-axis is the percentage of users and the y-axis is the percentage of contributions rejected. And we see that with each progressive quarter, the number of users who are able to make better quality contributions keep increasing. The second angle that I discuss now is on the necessity to diversify the content on the platform. So at the end of quarter 2, we conducted a phone survey with around 100 users. 50 of them were active users, 50 of them were inactive at that point. And we saw that there was self-selection happening, that only women with who were pregnant or had infants in the household were participating, and the other users were dropping out of the platform. But this hindered our broad goal of promoting intra-household SHG level and community level discussions around maternal and child health and nutrition. So we decided to diversify the content on the platform, and we, again through surveys, found that local news, children's education, and agricultural advisory, which we call the non-core content, appealed to the users, and this we included content from this theme on our platform. This table shows the participation changes from before the diversification of the content to after the diversification of the content. Yeah. The fourth column shows the percentage of users who listen to at least 80% of a content item. And we see that for female users, for core and non-core content in quarters 3 and 4, there has not been much of a change in the percentage of users who listen to at least 80% of the content. However, for male users, we do see a 7% increase in the listenership for core content and a 10% increase in the listenership for non-core content. And we also have evidence that for users who called us in both quarters 3 and 4, the users called more in quarter 4 compared to quarter 3 after the content was diversified. The next angle that I explore is on concurrent monitoring, the process of concurrent monitoring on the platform. There are primarily 3 metrics that we explored on the platform, and this helped us improve the implementation of the program concurrently. And these are the inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes. In the inputs, we monitored the number of trainings that the community mobilizers are conducting, the quality of discussion around mobile money that is happening, and the calls and contributions being made by the community mobilizers on the platform. And this helped us identify the active and the inactive users on the platform. The outputs, in the outputs, we monitor the number of calls made by the SHG members, the rate of skipping of different content themes, and the the quality of the user-generated content coming onto the platform. And this helps us understand if the trainings are translating to the usage of the platform, and which themes and which formats are resonating with the users and which are not. In the outcomes, we saw if the trainings and the usage on the platform is actually translating to awareness and behavior change outcomes. And this was monitored through surveys that I'll describe in a bit, and also through the UGCs, which clearly showed a shift in the awareness and behavior. For example, we computed the CM rating, the community mobilizer rating, based on the number of trainings conducted, the calls made by the community mobilizers, and the quality and number of UGCs that community mobilizer is contributing. And this input then helped us identify the inactive and the active users on the platform, and we then pushed additional training modules to inactive users, and then we promoted active users to additional training on news reporting. As example of output, we see this is the skip rate graph, which is the number of users who skip content of a particular theme before listening to at least 25% of the content. And we see that family planning has a high skip rate, for example. And one reason can be discussions around family planning is culturally not very accepted in rural India. And such feedback then helps us tweak and alter the content strategy so that we can engage more people on the platform. The outcomes are measured through IVR, automated IVR surveys, which are known as Knowledge, Attitude and Practice, KAP surveys, in which we monitor answers given on the IVR by exposed users and unexposed users. That is, users who have listened to the content and users who have not listened to the content. For example, to a question, how can you check if the food that you have prepared is of the correct consistency? We see that there is a 16% difference in the awareness levels of unexposed and exposed users. However, for another question, how many bowls of dal should a pregnant woman eat in a day? We see that there is not much of a difference in the exposed and unexposed users. And in such cases, we prepare and push "Did you know" episodes to reinforce the messages that we are conveying. The last angle that I explore is the mobilization pathways that we experimented with. Till now, I have been describing mobilization through the Jivika SHG network. However, we had another arm where we leveraged the Mobile Vani volunteer network that Aparna was describing to conduct the mobilization. But the problem was the volunteers in this geography we found were primarily male, and they found it difficult to access female users directly. And therefore, only 20% of the users on this platform were female. To overcome this, we started programs like child journalism, in which we trained school children on news reporting. And this, we found evidence that these children went back to their home and wanted access to their phones from their parents, and the parents wanted to know what are they doing. And that was a mechanism through which these parents we were able to convert the parents to Mobile Vani users. There's also some evidence that the male users are communicating the knowledge or the communication to the female family members. We also see that the SHG members, in the SHG mobilization arm, in the SHG members who attend the SHG meetings have a tilt to the higher age side, but the users who use the platform have a tilt towards the lower age size. So we see that the SHG mobilization pathway does have a high precision. That is, we are able to reach the women directly, but a low recall. That is, not all the people who are reaching are converting to users of our platform. And in the non-SHG users, of course, it is very hard to even reach women. The other observation that we make here is not the families who are dependent on labor or migrant families find it hard to attend SHG meetings, and therefore the SHG pathway is not able to reach many of these families, which the non-SHG pathway is able to reach in a more efficient manner. To conclude, 4 points, 4 takeaways. In order to conduct SBCC over mobile phones, we must keep in mind that the technology adoption process is not simple, it's hard, and it has to be persistent in training and nurturing the users. The second point is that diversification of the content on the platform helps in deepening the engagement. The third is that if you are able to concurrently monitor the usage of the platform, we might be able to improve the implementation of the program. And the last point is that for mobilization pathway, so the SHG has a high precision but low recall. However, the non-SHG pathway is able to probably reach more marginalized families. So thanking my partners at end here. So I am around, Adisar is around, so if you want to know more about our work around labor rights, financial inclusion, please come and talk to us.
Thank you. Any questions? Kudos to paying attention.
Yeah, so thank you again and congratulations again for a very successful deployment over a period of time. I probably did not completely understand what you said about the content, but what struck me was that you were changing the content based on whether people are engaged with the content or not. So maybe I heard this wrong, but are you saying that if people are not comfortable in listening to family planning related messages in a very personal medium, which is like an IVR, which is like, so nobody else is knowing what you're listening to, what would you do to it? I mean, would you drop it? I mean, that doesn't sound like a good idea.
No, it's not dropping as such. The themes are the same, but the way we present it is then different, so that it is more, maybe if you call it family friendly or such. The content team takes the call. How do you present it in a different way so that it's more culturally acceptable? So we don't drop the theme, if that is the question.
Thank you again. So next up we have Anirban Sen. He's going to talk about an attempt at using mass media data to analyze the political economy around some key ICTD policies in India. So before he starts, may I request every one of you to kind of get up for a second? Please get up. Just one. Just trust me on this. Just 1 minute or 10 seconds. Just stretch yourself. I know it's hard. I am finding it hard to even do timer, so I'm sure it's very hard to do. So yeah, thanks for cooperating. You can sit down again, and we'll let Anirban take it away. So your task is to kind of get a particular challenge, almost the penultimate presentation, an extra challenge to keep it focused.
Yeah, I'll try. Thank you, Rajesh. So, hello everybody, I am Anirban, and I'll be presenting my work on study of mass media data to analyze the political economy around some key ICTD policies in India. And I have done this work with my brilliant colleagues in the Act 4D team at IIT Delhi under the guidance of Dr. Aditeshwar Seth. So the broad research question that I tried to address in this work is, what can the media coverage of different ICTD policies tell us about the political economy around them? So if you take a look at this NDTV article, it's about Digital India, which is one of the policy issues that we study. Now here, Nandan Nilekani, who is an influential business person, is in support of the policy move. As you can see underlined, he talks about the ease of doing business through the policy move, Digital India. And since he is influential in the policy making process, his views might be highly covered in the mass media. That's what we can see from this article. Now, there are other articles, for example, statements made by politicians, like in this case, the Prime Minister supports Aadhaar and claims that it bolstered India's development and curbed corruption. The opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi, says that it's a compulsory weapon. And this is about the public distribution system. So a lot of academics discussed about this, that a lot of people were denied public distribution system food who did not have Aadhaar. So what do these articles really tell us? So we study 100 articles, 200 articles, and we get to know which entities have what views. But the question is, whose views are highlighted more in the media? Can we empirically evaluate that? Are these views equally represented in the policy making process? So these are some of the questions that I try to answer through my work. So we study 4 ICTD policies here: Aadhaar, Digital India, e-governance, and cashless economy. Now, once again, coming to the broad research question, what can the media coverage of these policies tell us about the political economy around them? So to answer this research question, we divide it into 3 observational questions. First is, which entities or entity groups are most vocal in mass media on these policy issues? Which aspects or topics of discussion are covered more in mass media on these policies? And finally, how do these entities speak about these policies? Are they positive about the policy, negative about the policy? What kind of sentiment slant do they carry? Coming to the research methodology in brief, so we collect data from 7 English language newspapers in India, and these are some of the widely circulated newspapers like Times of India, Hindu, Hindustan Times, Indian Express, New Indian Express, Deccan Herald, and Telegraph. I must mention here that we study only mainstream media articles here. So these are front page news articles, the news articles in business page. We have done a separate study using opinions and editorials, and I will report some figures from that study too. Sorry, not figures, but I'll describe what findings we have. So we extract articles from these newspapers, and we extract entities out of these articles and perform entity resolution. So that's the first step. The second step is we analyze the topics of discussion or aspects around different policies. For example, in case of Aadhaar, linkage with public distribution system was one of the topics that was widely discussed, even by some social activists and academics. And finally, for every aspect, we analyze the coverage and sentiment of the articles and statements made by the entities about the policies. So what kind of statements these entities make about the policies? So coming to the policies considered now, Aadhaar is a 12-digit unique identity number that can be obtained by any resident of India based on their biometric and demographic data. And in red, I have highlighted the government narrative in support of the policy. So here the government narrative was that it would lead to elimination of corruption caused by false or duplicate IDs to access entitlements and subsidies. However, as noted by many experts, later the implementation faced some problems. For example, denial of entitlement due to failures of biometrics, fingerprint issues. There were technical failures and poor internet connectivity. There were privacy and security issues like the issues on data leakage, which led to a lot of court cases. The next policy we study is cashless economy, where the plan was to create an economic state whereby all financial transactions are conducted through the transfer of digital information. So here the government narrative was that poor people without credit history or access to banks, they would now be able to create a data trail which would help them get easier access to credit sources. But the problems were that there was low access of digital tech to the poor, and there were trust issues. Some people simply said that we trust cash transactions over cashless transactions. And there was lack of technical capability, because of which many people could not use the digital wallets and the unified payment interfaces provided to them. Next comes Digital India, which plans to correct rural areas with high-speed internet networks, and the government believed that this would lead to the development, this would accelerate the development of the poor. However, due to lack of digital literacy, what happened was that there were people who could not identify fake news from correct news, and this led to misappropriation of these digital channels. And finally, the e-governance plan. So in e-governance, the plan was to make all government services available to the citizens via electronic media. And here the government narrative was that it would not require any paper forms, and it would lead to ease of management of information. However, because of limited technological skills, there were people who could not use these forms. There was lack of technology access and empowerment to the poor. And finally, as we note in case of the land digitization move of Bhumi in Karnataka, this policy move was also shaped and misused by the political economy, especially by the bureaucracy. So now I come to the data analysis process. So as I mentioned, these are 7 news sources that we study. I must mention here that although we understand that mass media might be biased, we have selected these newspapers considering commonly held beliefs of their ideological and political affiliations, and we are verifying these affiliations as part of our future work. So we collect articles, again these are mainstream news articles that we collect from mass media data, and these articles are then passed through OpenCalais, which is an entity extractor, and we get entities of this form. Here UIDI is the organization that maintains Aadhaar. Jon Snow and Snowjay, they refer to the same people, but they are mentioned in different forms in different news sources and different articles. So we need to resolve these entities now. So we pass them through an entity resolver, and we get a set of canonical representation for these entities, which along with the media articles are stored in the media database, which is a relational database. Now we take a two-pronged analysis approach. First, we pass these articles and statements by the entities through a sentiment and coverage analyzer. We get articles with positive sentiments and articles with negative sentiments, and statements with positive and negative sentiments. And then we also pass these articles through LDA. And we get different topics of discussion. For example, in case of Aadhaar, one topic might be linkage with the public distribution system, another might be privacy and security issues, another might be enrollment centers. And we call these topics of discussions aspects. And here is what our data looks like. So these are the 4 policy issues that we study and the number of articles we study under them. Now coming to the observational questions that we try to answer. So first one is, which entities or entity groups are the most vocal in mass media about these policy issues? So if you look at this graph on Digital India, one thing that you note is that this mainly consists of politicians. So these are the top 20 highest covered entities by newspapers. We find that, as expected, these are mostly politicians, followed by business persons like Mukesh Ambani and Nandan Nilekani. The presence of Mukesh Ambani can be easily justified by the role that Jio network played by disrupting the telecom space during the implementation and announcement and implementation of Digital India. Also, another thing that we note is that here the presence of policy experts and social activists is nearly, among the top 20 entities, we don't see any of their presence. So that coverage given to policy experts and academics and social activists, that's nearly negligible. This trend is reflected across policies. In case of Aadhaar, for example, we see Nandan Nilekani, who is a business person and the proponent of Aadhaar, getting a very high coverage. We get judiciary members because Aadhaar led to a lot of court cases. There are bureaucrats like the CEO of UIDAI in this case. And finally, in case of Aadhaar, since it was widely discussed among the academics and the social activists, we see the presence of John Race, who is an economist and social activist, and talked about the problems with the public distribution system when linked to Aadhaar. And similarly, in case of cashless economy, we find the presence of business persons, especially Vijay Shekhar Sharma, who is the CEO and founder of Paytm, the digital wallet, which took a huge leap when cashless economy was announced. And once again, we see the same kinds of trends. And there were bureaucratic economic advisors like Urjit Patel. And in case of e-governance also, we see the same trends. So what do these findings tell us? So from the first observational questions, we find that politicians are given the highest coverage in mass media. They are the most vocal, followed by business persons. But compared to them, social activists, academics, and policy experts get a negligible mention in mass media. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that we studied opinions and editorials separately, and here also the findings are nearly similar. Although academics do get social activists and academics do get a little more mention in case of op-eds, but then once again compared to politicians and business persons, their presence is negligible. Coming to the second question on which aspects are covered more by mass media. So here we see that for Digital India and Aadhaar, I have shown the graphs. It is consistent across policy issues. So we see that the topmost coverage is given to the aspects related to the middle class or states' approaches to encourage the schemes. For example, in case of Digital India, we see development of smart cities under the Digital India initiative. It alone got a 42% coverage, and this is a topic that encourages the scheme. Aadhaar enrollment centers that talks about the location of these enrollment centers and which documents to carry, which is a middle class aspect related to the middle class, it gets a 17% coverage. On the other hand, if we take a look at the aspects less covered, we find that failures in implementation of policies and problems of the poor are neglected. For example, absence of general infrastructure in smart cities gets a 1% coverage, whereas problems with the PDS, which talks about the poor, it gets a 3% coverage. Now, till now we saw the coverage given to different entities, who is most vocal and what kind of topics of discussion emerge in the mass media dominantly. However, if we now look at the third observational question on sentiment slant of these entities, we get some interesting findings. So this is the graph for Aadhaar, and here towards the right of 0 we have positive sentiment, towards the left we have the negative sentiment, and we find that business person like Nandan Nilekani are overly positive about these policy issues, as you can see from the statement highlighted in red. Same is the case with Mukesh Ambani, who is another influential business person, and he is in support of the policy move. Coming to another graph on Digital India, we see some expected findings, like ruling party members like Narendra Modi, they are in support of the policy issue, and this is a statement that Narendra Modi makes on Digital India. And the opposition members like Rahul Gandhi, they are not completely negative, they are less positive. This is because at some phase of the policy formulation and implementation, these opposition members were a part of the government. So they can't be completely negative, they are less positive. However, if we look at these statements, we can find that the politicians who are dominantly covered by mass media, they talk about surface level issues, and these comments are all surface level comments. They don't touch upon the details and technical nuances that perhaps the people should know. So these are all superficial comments that perhaps would help them gain political leverage. And hence we see that such kinds of comments that we see, which are surface level comments, these are not nuanced enough, and hence they cannot be expected, these politicians can't be expected to play an appropriately informed role in policy making, given that our findings are true and correct. So coming to the observations corresponding to the broad research question on political economy around policies, we find that significantly higher coverage is given to politicians, followed by business persons and bureaucrats, and compared to them, social activists, academics, and policy experts, they get a negligible coverage in mass media. High coverage is given to issues of the middle class and the aspects encouraging policies, whereas problems of the poor and the failures of the policies, the implementation issue problems of the policies are neglected. And finally, even the important people who are being highly covered by the media do not speak about the technical nuances and issues of the poor. Now we agree that these observations could just be an artifact of media bias. But if it indeed reflects which issues are considered more important in policy formulation, then we can clearly see the conflict that experts who understand the ground level implementation and the people for whom these policies are supposed to be built, they are both sidelined by the mass media. Also, even people who seem to be important in the policy making process and are covered more, they don't seem to take note of the issues of the poor. So finally, how is this work relevant for the ICTD community? So we just now talked about ICTD ethos, and we know that it's important to recognize where technology fails and why it fails as the ICTD practice. And we know the importance of iterative development, and we all know about the ethics of building technology as reported in various literature. However, the question is, are these ethos being followed while policy formulation? Or are these policies merely pushed blindly to get political leverage? These are some of the questions that our work tries to raise and tries to evaluate empirically. And finally, how to improve the policy making process. So feedback from the poor and the underprivileged, it's very important. But these things are neither being covered by mass media nor in a detailed or nuanced way by the prominent people in the policy making process. So these are some of the issues that we want to raise through our work and we want to address in future. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Any questions? Great.
So I have two things to say. One is a sort of a critical comment. So you've been using this word mass media to represent English newspapers. So, but all the English newspapers put together in India, their circulation is less than 7%.
Totally. I totally agree with that.
While it is convenient to analyze English text,
Yeah, so what we are so this in the process so in the process we showed OpenCalais, which is an entity extractor, and it works only for English language.
I know, it's very convenient.
So what we are doing currently is we are also studying vernacular sources. So that is part of another work that we are doing currently. So that is a totally agreeable comment. Yeah.
Just to wake up everybody. So the first name of Jon Snow was spelled wrongly. It is Jon, and his second name is Targaryen anyways.
Thanks, I think this was wonderful. Just one question I have is it anything specific about ICTs? Because you took up all areas which are digital India, e-governance, right? Is it anything specific about ICTs because of which you have these results, or would you have similar greater voice of politicians if you would have taken up a non-ICT probably development program? What is the sense? So that's something that I'm...
So are you asking whether this work is specific to the ICTD community?
Yes.
Yeah, so the major motivation behind this work has always been to answer two questions. So the first question is, what influences policy making? And these are, as you can understand, all ICTD policies. And the second question is how it influences policy making. So when we try to answer the what question, then there are various factors. For example, corporate government interlocks can be one. Another can be the ideologies that the people have while framing the policy. Someone is having a neoliberal ideology, so he might be framing the policies accordingly. And the how part, for the how part, we believe that mass media is an important avenue to influence public opinion. So
yeah.
Oh, okay. So right now we are considering 3 other policies, which I'm not sure those are economic policy issues, but that's an important feedback we'll in future look about.
Right. Let's thank the speaker. So the last paper is going to be an advertisement because the person is not here, and Andy graciously agreed to a 3-minute presentation. The paper's title, Are You Magicians? The Collaborative Work of an Agricultural Information Service. Just after the paper, Michael is for his keynote, so stay here. Thanks.
Okay, and the paper is by Lars Rune Christiansen and Hasib Hassan, who are at the IT University of Copenhagen, Mamuna Rashid, who works for Welthungershilfe, and Badal Kumar Das, who works for Empower, which is a social enterprise in Bangladesh. And the topic is about a farmer information service which uses automated SMS, and it's being used on a Char island in Bangladesh. So a Char island is a sort of a floating mud, it's a mud bank, if you like, and it kind of moves. It will flood most years, and where it is exactly will change. And the system itself is quite interesting in that farmers register the particular crops they're interested by, and the system responds to weather information and gives them both passes on the weather information, but also passes on tips that are relevant to that crop at that stage of the growth cycle and in response to that kind of weather event. But that's not what the paper's about. The paper is about the work to make the system work. So it's much more about the social activity that is then required in order to actually make this thing happen. And this goes beyond the SMS. This ends up with posters being stuck to telegraph poles. There's a discussion about trying to get the local mosque to disseminate the information. There's word of mouth transmission. So it's all around the work to make it work. I think the system itself is very interesting, and anybody who's in the kind of agriculture space should take a look at it. And I think the generic issue about the work to make it work is something that we should all be interested by. So I would recommend very highly that you take a look and read the paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is my utmost pleasure to introduce to you all Michael Mazgaonkar. I was thinking about how best to introduce him. I think the first word comes to me is one of my dear friend. I've been knowing him for the last 18 years or so. I would say that I almost, he was my first advisor, if you will, in terms of sensitizing myself to social issues. I was volunteering for a non-profit called AID, Association for India's Development, so where Michael was a Sati, which is essentially loosely translates to be a fellow. And I've spent numerous chais, hours, late nights, talking and debating, arguing about various issues, and I also seen many people go and visit Michael in his tribal village that he lives. He's been living for the last 27 years. Michael is an engineer at heart, but I think he's, I hope that, or I know that he has spoken to many of you and have made a deep connection personally, and I'm just going to read out his very short resume here. He's shaking his head. That's typical of Michael. But in any event, Michael was born and brought up in Mumbai, the Paunar Ashram, founded by Vinoba Bhave, a colleague and a spiritual heir of Gandhi. He left